Hollywood sold us dreams, but behind those silver screen smiles were stories no camera ever showed. These weren't affairs, career rivalries, or late-night meltdowns. They were heartbreaks far closer to home. What happens when the biggest stars of their generation suddenly face a challenge money, fame, and applause can't fix? Some fought with everything they had. Others crumbled under the weight. And a few made choices that still shock us today. Ready to see Hollywood's untold side? Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge looked unstoppable. She was the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, her face gracing the cover of Life magazine, her talent breaking barriers left and right. But when the cameras were off, her world looked nothing like the glamorous premieres. In 1943, Dorothy gave birth to her daughter, Harold Suzanne. For a brief moment, she believed she had it all: Hollywood fame and motherhood. Then came the words that crushed her forever. Harold had suffered brain damage during birth, leaving her unable to speak, understand, or ever live independently. Dorothy was relentless. She spent fortunes flying across the country, chasing specialists and experimental treatments. She even tried controversial procedures that promised results but delivered heartbreak. She wanted just one word: mother. That word never came. In a rare 1958 TV interview, the mask slipped. Dorothy admitted through tears, "I can sing for the world, but I can't make my child call me mother." For audiences, it was a shocking glimpse into the raw pain hidden behind Hollywood polish. The toll was crushing. Eventually, with no options left, Dorothy made the agonizing decision to place Harold in full-time care. Witnesses recalled her collapsing in the hallway, whispering, "I'm sorry, baby." That pain never left her. Dorothy's career may have made history, but her personal story reveals the brutal side of fame. While she dazzled audiences, she was privately grieving a dream of motherhood that fame could never heal. It's a reminder that even legends can't rewrite fate, no matter how bright the spotlight. Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney was once described as having the most beautiful face in cinema. She starred in Laura, Leave Her to Heaven, and dozens of classics. But one ordinary handshake from an adoring fan in 1943 would alter her life in ways no scriptwriter could invent. Tierney was 3 months pregnant when she visited an army camp in New Jersey. In the crowd, a young woman pushed through to greet her. What Gene didn't know was that this fan was carrying German measles, a virus devastating to unborn children. Months later, Gene gave birth to her daughter, Daria. Doctors delivered the devastating news. Daria was deaf, partially blind, and would face severe, lifelong challenges. For years, Gene carried the guilt like a weight chained to her. She blamed herself, though she had no idea of the danger at the time. In the cruelest twist of fate, years later, she met the same fan at a Hollywood party. The woman proudly said she had sneaked out of quarantine just to see Gene at that army camp. Gene stood frozen. The very fan who admired her had unknowingly caused her daughter's condition. The heartbreak never left her. Gene often visited Daria in a long-term care facility, sitting for hours holding her hand. She reportedly whispered to friends, "I can play 100 roles, but I can't play the role of a mother." Her words cut through Hollywood's illusions. Tierney's story shows how a single moment of fame, meant to bring joy to troops, became a lifetime of grief. For the woman once praised as flawless, her greatest wound came not from critics or the studio system, but from a chance encounter. And that pain reshaped the rest of her life. Lloyd Nolan. On screen, Lloyd Nolan was the man who always cracked the case. He played detectives, district attorneys, tough guys who never blinked when danger hit. But at home, he faced a riddle no Hollywood script had ever prepared him for: his son, Jay. Jay wasn't like other children. He didn't respond to his name, avoided eye contact, and seemed locked in a world only he could see. In the 1940s, words like autism were barely known. Doctors used cruel labels like mentally defective. The unspoken rule in Hollywood was clear: hide these children, place them in institutions, and never mention them again. But Nolan wasn't that kind of father. Instead of secrecy, he went public, something nearly unheard of in that era. In 1960, at a New York press conference, he stunned reporters when he admitted his son had autism. With tears in his eyes, he confessed, "I have been powerless before my son's suffering." The tough detective had dropped his mask, and for once, the room was silent. Hollywood insiders whispered it was career suicide. A star openly admitting his child wasn't perfect. Studios feared it would ruin his leading man image. But Nolan didn't care. He used his fame to help launch the National Society for Autistic Children, one of the very first organizations in the country dedicated to awareness and advocacy. He lobbied lawmakers, raised money for research, and gave families across America something they'd never had before: hope. In an industry obsessed with appearances, Nolan's choice was groundbreaking. He showed that honesty and courage could be more powerful than any role he ever played. And in doing so, he changed the conversation around autism decades before the rest of society began to catch up. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was the most famous face in the world. His Little Tramp character brought laughter to millions, turning him into a global icon of hope during hard times. But off-screen, Chaplin's personal life was far more complicated, and at one point, heartbreakingly tragic. In 1919, he and his first wife, Mildred Harris, welcomed their first child, a son they named Norman Spencer Chaplin. For 3 short days, Charlie believed he had it all: fame, fortune, and fatherhood. Then came the devastating news. Norman had been born with severe disabilities affecting his organs. Doctors explained the child would not survive. 3 days after his birth, the Chaplins stood by helplessly as their baby passed away in his crib. For the man who had built an empire on making the world laugh, there was no comedy, no spotlight, no escape from the crushing silence of loss. Chaplin never spoke much about Norman publicly, but those who knew him said the grief was immense. At the height of his early success, he had been stripped of what should have been his most joyful role: being a father. Behind the grease paint and bowler hat, Chaplin carried a wound he rarely acknowledged, a reminder that even the biggest star in the world couldn't escape life's cruelest twists. The marriage with Mildred Harris collapsed soon after, weighed down by tragedy and Chaplin's restless ambition. Studios covered the story quickly, burying the details to protect their golden star. Norman Spencer's name faded from headlines, and for decades, his brief existence was little more than a footnote in biographies. Yet, for Chaplin, the loss lingered. Friends recalled that while he showered his later children with affection, there was always a hint of protectiveness, as if he was determined never to feel that helpless again. The world remembers Charlie Chaplin as the man who made them laugh. But in 1919, he learned in the most painful way that even legends can be brought to their knees by the loss of a child who never got the chance to grow up. Paul Newman. Paul Newman had it all: those piercing blue eyes, an Oscar-winning career, a decades-long marriage to Joanne Woodward that Hollywood once called the definition of happiness. But even for Newman, there was one part of his life no amount of fame or success could fix: the struggles of his eldest son, Scott. Born in 1950 during Newman's first marriage, Scott grew up under the weight of a father who seemed larger than life. Imagine being the son of Cool Hand Luke or Butch Cassidy. For Scott, it wasn't inspiring. It was crushing. He battled undiagnosed dyslexia in school, where letters danced on the page like shadows he couldn't chase down. While his father became an icon, Scott fell behind, ashamed and frustrated. As Paul's fame soared, Scott's sense of invisibility deepened. Friends recalled him sitting alone in bars muttering, "Everyone knows my father is Paul Newman, but no one knows who I am." That sentence was the heart of his pain, being reduced to a famous man's son instead of his own person. The pressure and inner battles eventually spiraled into destructive choices. His life became a cycle of struggling to live up to impossible expectations while drowning in the feeling he never measured up. By his late 20s, tragedy struck. Scott died suddenly in Los Angeles, his life ending before it had even begun to settle. He was just 28. For Newman, the loss was devastating. Hollywood's cool, unflappable star was shattered. Friends recalled him collapsing in tears, haunted by guilt and questions that would never have answers. Did his fame crush his son? Could he have done more? In Scott's memory, Paul and Joanne founded the Scott Newman Center to educate young people about the dangers of addiction and despair. It was Newman's way of turning grief into purpose, ensuring Scott's short life still made an impact. Yet, behind every award and every philanthropic effort, there was always an empty seat at the table. Even for a legend like Paul Newman, the price of fame came with a wound no spotlight could ever heal. Anna Magnani. Anna Magnani wasn't your typical Hollywood star. The fiery Italian actress wasn't known for glamour. She was known for raw, emotional performances that cut straight to the bone. But what audiences never realized was that her deepest role wasn't on screen at all. It was as the mother of a boy who would never walk. Her son Luca was struck by polio at a young age. Doctors delivered the verdict bluntly. Paralysis was permanent. He would spend his life in a wheelchair. For most parents, that would have been a crushing defeat. For Magnani, it became her daily mission. Every morning in Rome, she began her day not with makeup or rehearsals, but by lifting Luca from his bed into his chair. Then she'd go to set, pour her soul into her performance, and rush back home to sit beside him as he attempted tiny movements in therapy, stretching an arm, trying to stand with crutches, often through tears of pain. She refused to break down in front of him, even when her own heart was in pieces. Magnani took film roles not for vanity or trophies, but to pay for medical care. She once said candidly, "The world thinks I live for art, but the truth is, I act to feed Luca." That wasn't a figure of speech. Her career choices revolved around his needs. Even after winning the Academy Award for The Rose Tattoo, she downplayed the golden statue. To her, it was just another paycheck to fund doctors and specialists who might give her son a chance. What set Magnani apart was her refusal to hide her child. In an era when disability was treated like a secret, she appeared with Luca publicly. She didn't consider him an embarrassment. She considered him her reason for fighting. That defiance gave her performances their unmistakable depth. The pain in her eyes on screen wasn't acting. It was life. Anna Magnani proved that true greatness wasn't in the applause of strangers, but in the quiet, unrelenting love of a mother who never stopped believing in her son. Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd was the silent era's daredevil. Fans remember him dangling from a skyscraper clock in Safety Last and turning life-threatening stunts into slapstick gold. He was the man who made millions laugh, the comedian who always walked away smiling. But in private, Harold faced something no stunt could prepare him for: the unraveling of his daughter, Gloria's mind. As a teenager, Gloria began showing signs that something was terribly wrong. One day, she was cheerful and radiant. The next, she locked herself in her room, screaming, smashing objects, or retreating into long silences. Doctors whispered a word most families dreaded in that era: schizophrenia. There were no modern treatments, no proper understanding. The only answers were harsh sedatives or electroshock therapy, both more punishment than cure. For Harold, it was a cruel irony. The man who had risked life and limb in front of cameras, who never flinched as he scaled buildings, was powerless in the face of his daughter's suffering. He carried her to clinics, begged specialists for help, and watched as she returned home vacant, sometimes not even recognizing him. Hollywood gossip spread quickly. Whispers of the comedy king with a broken daughter circled in hushed tones. Harold kept silent, retreating from the spotlight, rather than expose Gloria to the cruelty of public judgment. He'd sit quietly at her side, the man who once lived for applause, now reduced to helpless silence. What made it harder was knowing Gloria had once shown promise as a performer herself. She had her father's comedic timing and natural charm, flashes of what might have been, before illness stole it away. For audiences, Harold Lloyd remained the smiling daredevil. But behind closed doors, his greatest act wasn't a stunt. It was holding his daughter's hand through a darkness no joke could lighten. Jackie Coogan. In 1921, the world fell in love with a little boy named Jackie Coogan. As Charlie Chaplin's sidekick in The Kid, he became America's first true child star. His expressive face and heartbreaking innocence made audiences cry, laugh, and cheer. But fame betrayed him early. His parents squandered nearly every dollar he earned. That betrayal led to the Coogan Law, which still protects child actors' wages today. But fate wasn't finished with Jackie. When he became a father himself, he faced heartbreak that no courtroom could fix. One of his sons was born with profound neurological challenges. The boy couldn't speak, struggled to communicate, and lived in a world largely cut off from those around him. For Jackie, who had made a fortune showing expression and emotion on screen as a child, the irony was brutal. His own son could not even call him Dad. Jackie tried everything. He flew his son across the country to specialists, experimented with speech therapy, physical therapy, even controversial treatments that promised miracles but never delivered. Each attempt ended the same way, with silence. His son remained locked in a world beyond reach. Friends later recalled Jackie breaking down in private, confessing that he felt cursed. "They only remember me as Chaplin's boy," he said bitterly. "But they don't know what I've lost." He had lost not only his fortune as a child, but also the voice of his own son. Unlike other stars who shielded themselves with denial, Jackie never abandoned his child. He kept his son close, choosing privacy over public exposure. For a man who grew up with cameras capturing every move, it was his way of giving his son a dignity he himself had been denied. Jackie Coogan's story is one of the cruelest twists in Hollywood history. The boy who symbolized innocence and hope for millions grew into a man carrying silent grief of his own, a father forever waiting for words from a son who would never speak them. Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. Charles Laughton was the kind of actor who could terrify you with a single glare. Elsa Lanchester, immortalized as the Bride of Frankenstein, was his equal, sharp, witty, and unforgettable. Together, they were hailed as Hollywood's most artistic marriage, a power couple who lived for the craft. Fans assumed they simply chose not to have children, preferring the stage and screen to family life. But the truth was far darker. Privately, Charles and Elsa had adopted a baby early in their marriage. For a brief moment, they embraced parenthood with joy. But doctors soon delivered a crushing diagnosis. The child suffered from severe birth defects, with spinal deformities and developmental delays that would limit both speech and movement. In the ruthless world of 1930s, Hollywood, where even the hint of imperfection could be spun into a scandal, this was seen as a career-ending secret. The couple agonized over what to do. Friends later recalled Charles sitting in their living room, glass trembling in his hand, whispering, "I can face millions of spectators, but I can't face this truth." Eventually, they made the decision that would haunt them forever. The child was quietly placed in a care facility outside Los Angeles, removed from their daily lives as if he had never existed. To the public, Charles and Elsa remained childless, their lives supposedly devoted to art. But insiders noticed subtle cracks. Elsa often grew quiet at the sight of children. Charles, normally fierce and commanding, sometimes drowned his sorrows in long nights of drinking, muttering about a part of himself he'd left behind. For decades, the secret held. Only much later, When film historians uncovered letters and testimonies, did the truth emerge? The marriage the world thought was perfect had been scarred by an impossible choice, and the silent grief of two parents who could never fully admit what they had lost. Hollywood sold perfection, but these stories reveal the price hidden behind the curtain. Stars who looked untouchable were secretly broken by battles no spotlight could erase. Some fought, some hid, and some carried guilt to the grave. And yet, through their pain, we see their humanity more clearly than any role ever could. Which of these stories surprised you most? Share your thoughts. Hit that like button and subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths.